Hello, Nathaniel Tice here again with the therapy bar, and we're going to be going through a long list of all the muscles and the various motions. You'll be able to fast forward these, rewind them, and go back to reference the motions in which you're doing. Make sure that you're on the same track and same page as we want you to be. So we're going to start with basically all of our right side rotators. And then you guys can compare left to right to see what things feel like. So we're going to start with lower TBA. We've got a longer video on this, but again, the sensations that we want to be feeling with this are just as important as the motion and movement itself. So when feeling for that lower TBA, we're going to go almost into a bit of a, almost like a little bit of a Heisman split stance here. So we're going to be putting most of our weight on that front leg, while keeping our foot nice and flat on the floor. From there, we're going to wrap this bar right up next close to our rib cage so that just our thorax is moving, not just our shoulders and or hips in particular. With 90% of our weight on that front leg, we're going to crunch forward and rotate, crunch forward and rotate, crunch forward and rotate. And again, what we want to be feeling for is a muscle that wraps down the line of our umbilicus here into that pubic bone, wraps all the way in the crest of the ilium, ties into that thoracolumbar fascia in the back. So when you feel this muscle, it kind of feels like an abdominal in the front, an oblique in the side, and an erector in the back. Jumping into and right next to our lower TBA is the upper one. So again, we're going to do all right rotation. So essentially the upper TBA is an opposite side rotator. So we're going to be working the left side here. Same stance as we did with the right leg. Now the left leg's forward, 90% of our weight on that, and we're pretty much rotating and twisting the same way. So we rotate and twist, rotate and twist, rotate and twist. Now again, we've got the external oblique on the left side here that you could start to feel for and could potentially take over. What we want to make sure that we're feeling for is a muscle that wraps all the way into the middle of the six-pack here, not just on the outside of it like our external oblique, which we'll be getting into here in a moment. So when feeling for this muscle, again, we're feeling for that linea alba all the way up to the xiphoid process, and again onto the tips of the costal cartilage of our ribs. That is going to be a big difference between that upper TBA and external oblique right next door to it. The external oblique comes up higher on the rib cage, and it only comes into the outside of our six-pack here. So again, we're going to flex, rotate, flex and rotate, flex and rotate. And you see that the motion is coming from spinal flexion, not just hip flexion, not just bringing my torso close to the leg. I'm actually flexing and rounding the spine. So as a unit, say we're working the right side here, we want to start with the lower part, feeling for that, then throw a little bit of a crunch in to get the entire muscle. Another quick little motion, just hold our little Heisman type motion. You can just squeeze and feel for that, feeling for that entire transversus abdominis. Again, moving right along into our internal oblique. Now again, the internal and external oblique I find to be most isolated in a kneeling position, so we're going to jump on down to the floor here. And because the orientation of the internal oblique is more on the posterior lateral side of our pelvis, that's going to give us a mechanical advantage in same side rotation, along with slightly extending the spine. So we're going to do it with our knee down. That's again going to keep this hip neutral from flexing, and again put more of the emphasis on the outside back part of our torso here. So we're going to, again, be in a kneeling position here. We're going to have 90% of our weight on this back leg. We're not going to be moving the hips at all. Again, we're going to try and keep these motions from the waist up. From there, we're going to keep the back slightly extended as we twist and just rotate. Now again, when we feel for these motions, it's one thing just to go through the exercise and twist and keep your fingers crossed as to what we want to be feeling. Now we need to be a little bit more specific. We're going to hold and squeeze, following our normal protocol, about 6-second hold, repeated, holding up to 30, 40, 50 seconds, up to a minute. And again, those type 1 muscle fibers are what atrophies on us as we mature, and the thing that we always neglect in the gym. So even if you are doing 500-pound deadlifts, we're still wanting to hold and squeeze to engage those type 1 muscle fibers, which become fatigued through more time under tension. So with that being said, we want to feel for this muscle that is on the back outside part of our torso here. And again, as you start to feel for that muscle, it literally, you can feel the back half of the crest of the pelvis here. And that internal oblique only ties up into ribs 8 through 12. So you're not going to feel it up here onto the upper ribs. If you are feeling it towards the top here, that's the external taking over, and or the upper part of that TVA. So again, we're going to go for a sensation on the rib cage. Internal, external is a little bit higher. We're going on just the tips, but not on the very tips. We're just going to come in an inch or so. And again, that ties into the thoracolumbar fascia, and you're going to feel that interdigitating with our glute max, along with that TVA underneath the internal. So, moving along now to the external oblique. It's an opposite side rotator. So if we're working right side rotation, we're going to be rotating to the right, feeling for left external oblique. So again, because this muscle's attachment is more towards the front half of the crest of the pelvis, as it spiders up into our torso, you can see that it's going to be more like hands in pocket, as a result, rotating us to the opposite direction. Because its orientation is on the front half here, it can almost have a bit of an influence in flexion. That's where we're going to set the pelvis. So, internal oblique, the knees down, external oblique, the knees up, as we come into our little position here once again. And the left side is what we're feeling for. So we're going to rotate to the right. So we do a minor little side bend crunching motion to the left. The more we side bend, the more we feel the lower part. The more we rotate, the more we feel the upper part. So again, distinguishing the sensation of our external oblique between our transversus abdominis, basically, we want that external oblique. You're going to feel that sensation all the way up to the 5th rib underneath the pec there as it comes down a few inches in off the rib cage here. And as a result, we feel it on the outside of our abdominals. If you feel something coming all the way into the middle here, that's again our TVA. And we want to be soft and subtle as we are very, very specific with the sensation of this motion. So again, 90% of our weight is going to be on this left leg. As we try not to put all of our weight on the back leg, we're going to lean a little bit into it as we squeeze and rotate, squeeze and rotate. Again, focusing more on the rotational aspect than the flexing. So if we were wanting to try and get more of that TVA, we'd throw in a little bit more flexion. So, since we're down here, we're going to keep it rolling. And from this position, we see that if the right knee is down, we're trying to work right rotation, that's going to have the biggest mechanical influence on our internal oblique. Now, if we rotate to the left in this right leg kneeling position, we actually get the spinal muscles that are opposite side rotators on the back of our body. So we start to feel for multifidus, rototres, quadratus lumbarum, and some psoas. And again, I know there's some debate on what the QL does, but in this position you're going to feel it working in conjunction with the psoas as an opposite side rotator. So from this position with the spine extended and we rotate to the opposite side, we get the biggest mechanical pull out of that quadratus lumborum. And again, if you feel it come on down onto the sacrum, you're working multifidus. If you feel something really medial, not quite so far on the outside, you could be working a little bit of rototres. So essentially what we're looking to feel for is this muscle to end right where the ribs begin, where it attaches to that 12th thoracic rib. Okay, moving along here. So we covered our obliques, now our trunk flexors. So in the scheme of things, the more I move forward in between these bands, the more it's going to try and pull me back into extension. The more I move back, with the bar on my back, the more it's going to pull me into flexion. So if we're trying to work our trunk flexors, the abdominals, then we're going to be wanting these on. We're going to want the bar in front of us pulling us into more of an extended position. So from here we're going to put a majority of our weight on this left leg. Again, the abdominals are opposite side rotators as they primarily flex us, and they work in descending order. So when I first initially crunch and barely rotate, and again they've got a minor influence in rotation, so the primary motion here is flexion. We're going to flex, barely rotate, you feel the upper. We're going to flex, barely rotate, we feel the third underneath it. So we flex and keep barely rotating. We're going to feel that second, and again as we fully flex our torso and have a minor influence in rotation, is when we get that first and lower abdominal. So that's how we're going to be working those. Remember, if we're only doing crunches, we're never going to feel those lower abdominals, which are generally the most inhibited and most weak on people. So if we do the same motion and rotate to the same side in our fully flexed position, the further we go down, the more we're going to get this little pyramidalis. So the pyramidalis is basically the very bottom. I want you to imagine like the very bottom abdominal, and it works as a same side rotator in maximum trunk flexion. So the more we flex and barely rotate, we start to feel the base of those abdominals, which essentially is that pyramidalis. So that pretty well ties and takes care of our obliques and trunk flexors. So now we're moving on to spinal extensors. And essentially the whole premise behind what I want you guys to feel with these muscles is the fact that we've got two sets of musculature. We've got a set of muscles very, very, very close to the spine that run along both sides, and we've got a set of musculature that runs a little bit more lateral on both sides. So again, the muscles close to the spine act like the external oblique, an opposite side rotator. The muscles further from the spine act like an internal oblique, a same side rotator. They're primarily extensors. But again, we see that those muscles, the transversospinalis muscles, very close to the spine, have a significant influence in rotation. So we're going to start with probably the most significant of those transversospinalis, opposite side rotators. So if I'm rotating to the right, we're going to be feeling for muscles on the left. What we're going to do is we're going to stagger our feet just a hair, so that essentially this right foot is slightly more forward than our left. Because if this muscle's a right side rotator, the more we put the right hip forward, the right leg forward, the more we're going to be already in a right rotated position. So we're just going to barely stagger that stance. Still putting most of our weight on the left leg. What we're going to be doing is extending and slightly rotating. Extend, slightly rotate. Extend, slightly rotate. Now again, we've got three major muscles that we're going to be talking about on the back side of our spine, very close to it on the left, that have an influence in rotating us right. The multifidus is the first of these, and it runs all the way down onto the sacrum. So if you can feel where these two little bones start in our pelvis, that's essentially right where the sacrum begins. Now, if we're doing this motion, we do want to feel it all the way onto that sacrum as it weaves its way up all the way to the base of our skull. We're going to start at the bottom, feel this muscle interdigitate with the big glute max, our butt muscle, as we follow that sensation all the way up the spine. And we're going to keep rolling, keep rolling, keep rolling. The more we twist or rotate when we're doing this, the more this rototres muscle is going to take over. Now again, it's very difficult to distinguish between the multifidus and the rototres. So initially, I want you guys to feel for the sensation of which one comes down to the sacrum, our multifidus, and the rototres comes, it does not come onto the sacrum. So it starts right where our pelvis begins. And it comes out a little bit more lateral on the transverse process of our lumbar vertebrae, whereas the multifidus doesn't come out quite as far. It comes to the mammillary processes. So our multifidus, we want, again, a slight little stagger. The right foot's a little bit forward if we're working left multifidus, and from there we keep the back nice and straight. Everything that we ever do when involving the torso or hips is tighten the TVA first. And again, that's why we started with those oblique muscles. We get all this musculature around the torso, and all we think about is the little spinal muscles in the back. They're not the #1 priority when coming to stabilize the trunk. So we're going to tighten the torso, stagger our stance a bit, and we're going to extend as we barely rotate. Extend, barely rotate. Now again, the multifidus is going to have a minor influence in rotation, with its primary function being extension. Basically going and putting our feet in the exact same stance, we're talking about how the rototres doesn't come down all the way onto the sacrum. So we want to start feeling for this muscle basically right where those hip bones start. And if you feel it down onto the sacrum, you're feeling multifidus. If we don't feel it onto the sacrum, more than likely you're feeling rototres. Rototres comes out a little bit further. And basically all we're going to do with this is, instead of emphasizing the extension so much, we're going to emphasize more of rotation. So we rotate and extend, and again, as we get all the way to the top, we want to feel that muscle come all the way to the base of our skull, just like our multifidus. Now again, the third and last and most superficial of our transversospinalis muscles is the semispinalis. Now again, the multifidus runs from sacrum to occiput. The rototres runs from our 5th lumbar vertebrae, the very bottom one, up to the occiput. The semispinalis runs from the base of the skull here down to the 12th rib. So we're feeling for a muscle on top of the other two that's more superficial, and its primary function is extension of the spine. So we're going to keep a neutral stance. The more we extend and then barely rotate, again we start to feel this muscle on top of the rototres and the multifidus that we just worked. And again, I want you to try and feel for these muscles running all the way from top to bottom. The more we side bend to the left, the more we're going to feel those left side rotators that have an influence in extension and right rotation. So those are our 3 big muscles: the multifidus all the way from top to bottom, the rototres a little bit more rotation, and the semispinalis is going to be more extension than anything else as we rotate and extend, rotate and extend. Again, feeling for where these muscles begin and end is about the only way we can start to initially distinguish between the sensations of them. Moving along, we're going to now be working on our iliocostalis. So again, whichever side we're trying to emphasize, we're going to be putting the leg forward on that. So if the left multifidus is a right rotator, then that's why we staggered the foot. Again, if the iliocostalis has an influence in right rotation, then again, we're going to give ourselves a bit of a staggered stance here. Again, we're going to fix the bar to the back so that the thorax is the only thing moving here. We don't want just the shoulders, and we definitely don't want these hips swiveling all over the place. From here, we're going to rotate as far as we can and then extend. And again, we can put most of our weight on this right leg to emphasize the musculature on the right side of our body. And that's how we are going to primarily distinguish between the muscles on the left side that rotate us right and the muscles on the right that rotate us right. If we rotate and extend, we should be feeling big extensors on the right side of our body. If we extend then rotate, we're going to be feeling those little guys closer to the spine on the left. So that gives us an idea of how we can start to set up these motions. So again, putting our right foot forward, most of our weight on that right leg, the pelvis is glued. We're going to rotate as far as we can as we extend. Rotate and extend, rotate and extend, rotate and extend. The further we rotate and extend, the further we're going to feel that muscle as it creeps its way up onto the very outside of our pelvis, and again into the outside part of our spine. Now, our longissimus right next to our iliocostalis, moving our way in, it's going to have more of an influence in extension. So we're going to rotate just a bit as we emphasize more of the extension component. as we barely rotate, extend, barely rotate, extend, barely rotate, extend, barely rotate. And again, we're moving our way in. So the last muscle we felt was a little bit more lateral on the outside of our rib cage. This one is that big band of tissue that you see on people's backs. That's the muscle that we're looking for, running up along the right side. Its primary function is extension, and it has minor influence in rotation. So that is our longissimus. Moving on now to the spinalis. Basically, this is the last of our erectors and the most medial. So from here, we're going to again go into a bit of a staggered stance, and we're going to primarily, with just a hair of rotation, we're then going to be mainly focusing on just extension and a little bit of side bend. The more we side bend, the more we're going to feel it towards the group of musculature that we want. Side bending is not the main function of that muscle, so barely rotate, extend, big chest up, and side bend. And again, we're feeling for two different parts. We've got a lumbar division and a thoracic. The lumbar comes down to the very top of our sacrum and is the most medial of these big erectors. So we're feeling for something like we did on the left, very close to the spine, but more so superficial and a little bit more lateral. So again, that's going to isolate that spinalis. Now, moving along to our lat, which will be done again in a kneeling position. There's two ways we can work the lat. We can work it with the bar in front of us or in the bar behind us. I'm going to show you both ways. So we're going to start by keeping this knee down like we did with our internal oblique. The orientation of this muscle has a very similar type of layout on our spine. This is the preferred motion. So again, because the lat ties into the humerus, we're actually going to be wanting to drive the sensation of this muscle with the elbow. And again, feeling for three different parts. Essentially a part that connects to the very, very bottom onto our sacrum, a part that connects to the lumbar spine, the lower 5 vertebrae, and a part that connects to the lower half of our thoracic. So we've got three big parts all together. The more we drive our elbow back without emphasizing so much rotation of the spine, the more we get that thoracic. The more we drive the elbow back and a little bit inward and down, we start to get that lumbar aspect of it. And again, the more we rotate, side bend, driving the elbow back and down towards our glute, the more we start to feel it all the way onto the sacrum. So that's one way we can hit it. So again, this arm's just here to help kind of keep this from sliding off our elbow on the other side. We're not really pushing with this arm. We're not really trying to get this oblique to fire up either. Keep all the emphasis on the right side as we elbow back and we push, keeping our back nice and straight, side bend and rotate towards it, feeling for that muscle from top to bottom. Now, again, we can do a similar type of motion standing if where emphasis is more in just pushing the arm straight back. So, if we bring our bar in front of us, very similar motion, except instead of driving the elbow, we're just going to drive the entire arm. Personally, I like the kneeling position a little better. As time goes on, we want to be able to feel for these no matter what position we're in. So again, we go back, we get the upper part, we go back and in, we start to get the lumbar, we go back and in, and start rotating. We can really feel it creep all the way down the outside part of our spine as it wraps into this outside part of the pelvis, middle part of the spine. And again, we talked about how it comes all the way up from the middle of our thorax all the way down to between the crack. And that is a good place to start.